Good Erev Shabbos, Parshas Behar Bechukosai. It is a double parsha this week. And in this week's Sedra, we have the mitzvah of Shemittah, letting the land lie fallow once every 7 years. And although this mitzvah is, from one perspective, a chok, it is not particularly a rational mitzvah. It's not a non-rational mitzvah. It's not an irrational mitzvah. It's not necessarily a mitzvah that we might have come up with on our own. Nevertheless, the rabbis over the ages have attempted to give some type of meaning, spiritual benefit, and profound expression and depth to what the mitzvah can provide us. The Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim says there's a very practical aspect here to the mitzvah, and that is simply the land lies fallow once every 7 years, and it enables the land to rest, rejuvenate, and the soil will not be depleted and will be able to produce much better in the following years. And if we run on this cycle, the land will produce for us. However, if that is indeed the case, some question the Rambam, if that is indeed the case, so why is there a punishment for not doing Shemitah? If it's for the land, so why am I being punished and furthermore being exiled from the land as a punishment? Would it be better for a non-Jewish nation to come and conquer the land, and for their farmers to work the land on a regular basis without the mitzvah of Shemitah? Is that better? Will that be a more efficacious use of the land? Probably not. So, if the whole purpose here is for the benefit of the land, then sending the Jewish people into exile for lack of fulfilling this mission of Shemitah would not seem to be any more beneficial for the land. Having said that, putting this aside, there's a second approach. And this is brought down in the name of the Baal HaKedah, says the following. The purpose of Shemitah is for us to experience and be aware of the 6-7 cycle, i.e., 6 years that we work the land and a 7th year that we rest, to remind us, Bereshis bara Elokim, God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. So it is meant to remind us that the world is a finite space. It's created by Hashem, Chidush Ha'olam. It hasn't been around forever and will not necessarily exist forever. It is a finite space. And therefore, the idea of Shemitah is for us to reinforce this. We see the 6-7 pattern, and we are reminded of the original 6-7 pattern of Brias Ha'olam. However, the challenge that some offer against this approach is simply that we have Shabbos for that. Every week, Shabbos is 6 days of work and a 7th day to remind us that Hashem rested, the world was created in 6 days, and God rested on the 7th. And that comes up every single week, every 7 days. And if that is not going to be sufficient, why do we think that a mitzvah of Shemitah, which is once every 7 years, will somehow be more effective than Shabbos, which comes up once every 7 days? That being the case, there is yet a third approach, and that is that the purpose of Shemitah is for us to realize that we are not masters of our fate, we are not masters of the land, we are not masters of the blessing that we attempt to produce for ourselves. Yes, we must work, and yes, we must try to achieve, and yes, we must try to provide and feed ourselves, our families, and our communities. But, at the end of the day, Shabbos Lashem, the land lies fallow for a year where we cannot do anything, and we are entirely reliant and dependent on Hashem. This is an exercise in emunah and bitachon, and a reminder that just as this 7th year we feel viscerally that we are reliant on Hashem, so the other 6 years of the cycle, we should realize that even though we toil and even though we labor, the product of that toil and labor and blessing is ultimately only a consequence of Hashem's bracha. And so it is an understanding that we have to be reliant on Hashem at all times. And this Shemitah year is a good exercise in that emunah and bitachon. One final approach, and that is cited in the Sefer Har Hamor in the name of the Kli Yakar. He says the following, a rather interesting approach. If you look at the 7-year cycle, so each year of the 6 years that we work, the Talmud says 2 months a year, the farmers, the people in Israel, were supposed to leave the study halls, the Batei Medrash, and go work the fields, and work in full gusto and in full force. And for 2 months to work, to labor, to harvest, to make the parnasa for the year. And as such, we'll be able to dedicate ourselves to spiritual pursuits the other 10 months of the year. In year 1, 2 months are dedicated to parnasa, while 10 are dedicated to spiritual pursuits. In year 2, the same 10-2 ratio. In year 3, 4, 5, and 6, the same 10-2 ratio. And so what emerges is after the course of 6 years, we have a total of 12 months that have been dedicated for labor, for toil, for farming, for creating sustenance. And so the year of Shemitah is meant as a tashlumin, is meant to compensate for the 12 months over the 6-year cycle that we dedicated exclusively to sustenance and to working the land. So at the end of the day, Shemitah is nothing less than an opportunity for us to focus and to concentrate our minds, our hearts, and our thoughts on the Torah, on the study of the Torah, and thus to give us the spiritual depth, the intellectual heft, and the guidance to be able to live deep and profound Jewish lives through all other 6 years of the Shemitah cycle. So here we have several approaches to Shemitah. At the end of the day, Shemitah is a mitzvah which we do because Hashem asked us to do it. And to the extent that it has one or the other benefits as outlined above, well, all the power to us. And I think that even those of us who live in Chutz La'aretz, who do not necessarily have the opportunity to observe the mitzvah of Shemitah, as Shemitah is not applicable in Chutz La'aretz, outside of the land of Israel, nevertheless, these are very valuable and worthwhile lessons to remind ourselves of and to recommit to. Good Shabbos to all.